Welcome to This is Concrete, a podcast where we speak with the people whose work revolves around concrete and coatings. Let's get to what you came for.
Hello, Chad Gill here. I'm the host of the This is Concrete podcast, where I talk with leaders in facilities management, architecture, contracting, and more. This episode is brought to you by Concreate. Concreate is a concrete polishing and coatings company with nearly 20 years of experience working in the commercial, industrial, and residential markets. So whether you need smooth transitions for warehouse traffic, a show-stopping lobby floor, or a seamless concrete accent wall, we can provide the skill and imagination you need to make your concrete uncommon. So what are you waiting for? Visit us at thisisconcrete.com and learn more about Concreate today. So on the show today, we have Austin Windham. Austin is based out of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, New Jersey. That was last. That's terrible. It's very different. Austin is a coatings consultant with Tnemec. He's worked in the coatings industry for almost 4 years. He's a certified coatings inspector, and he specializes in resinous floor and industrial coatings, water tank restoration, and exterior architectural restorations. He's married to his wife's name is Kayla, and he has 2 children, Austin Jr. and Bianca. So, Austin, thanks for coming on, man, and I appreciate you being willing to kind of talk to us about some of this stuff.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no doubt. So, I don't know why we're saying New Jersey. I don't know. There's not even a song about New Jersey on my mind. North Carolina, maybe. But, so good area to be. And then I guess you're there and you may be moving from there, kind of moving directions.
Yeah, so actually the wife and I are looking at houses around the Hampton Roads area right now. So yeah, we're looking at moving in the next 6 months or so towards the Virginia Beach area around Hampton Roads type of thing. And so
I like that. That's service right there. We started working with you and hell, you move closer to
and I'm going to move my whole family for you. You know,
that's the Tnemec way right there, man. Bring it on.
For sure.
That's awesome, man. So what I wanted to ask you about today is, okay, let's say we've got a customer and for the sake of my business, let's say we couldn't talk them into polished concrete for whatever reason. And they're saying, okay, well, we're looking for a coatings type of application. And normally what gets my customer, like when I'm talking to somebody, they're like, okay, the keywords I'm looking for is, when they say polished or coating, they're like, hey, well, I need, I need surface traction, or I'm really worried about staining. That's the big thing that's a warning, a red flag to me. You say we've got some real concerns with stain or hydraulics and stuff like that. But once you get through that and you say, okay, I want a coating for my floor, how do you start to channel these people into the right floor system? And where do you start with that?
Well, typically, let's start at the basics when we're having a meeting. Let's walk the floor and see what you got and what you're dealing with. So some folks have some bad joints or a lot of cracks and that kind of thing on their existing floor that need to be addressed before applying an epoxy floor coating. So really, in terms of getting a good specification together, the first thing you need to do is check out what you have. The other aspect is, how do you want the finished product to look? Are you really looking for any kind of desired aesthetic finishes? Or how do you want the floor to perform over time? Are you exposed to certain chemicals, or you want it to be very cleanable? A lot of times folks want a cleanable and a slip resistant floor, which can be a bit of a double-edged sword. The more cleanable you make a surface, the less slip resistance is going to be. So,
that's definitely good.
So really a big aspect is saying, hey, what do you want your finished floor to look like? And how are we going to get to that point with the existing floor that you're looking at? So yeah.
So when you're talking so let's just take a couple of scenarios. Okay. In a warehouse, a warehouse guy says, hey, look, I just want to seal my floor so that it's not dusting and it's easily cleaned. And, I can put some line striping down and stuff like that.
Yeah, typically, if you're looking for something that's just easily cleaned, a lot of times a lot of folks are pushing towards that thin film flooring system. 2 coats of epoxy with your optional your aliphatic polyurethane finish coat. That really that'll give you about 20 mils of a finished coating system that you can pigment it to any color you want, or you can really make that metallic type of finish with a thin film epoxy system. Generally speaking, I do recommend that urethane finish coat because it gives you some skid resistance with some aluminum oxide grit, just a very, very minimalistic skid resistance, and also gives you some color gloss retention and abrasion resistance as well. So
when you're talking about it, I guess we start with that. What are epoxies good for, and what are urethanes good for? And then, when do you use, where do you?
So I mean, there's a full gamut of epoxies. I work for, a full line of coatings a coatings manufacturer that manufactures a full line of coatings. About 60 to 80% of those are typically epoxies. Epoxies, can serve a couple of different purposes, but for the most part, with a resinous flooring system, you're really looking for some film build and some good adhesion. Epoxies do a really good job of biting to a substrate, whereas something like a urethane finish coat doesn't bite to a substrate very well, but will stick to an epoxy. So one of the characteristics is the downfall of most 100% solids epoxies is that they do lose their color and gloss pretty quickly, and they'll actually start to either chalk or yellow over time when they're laying out and exposed to ultraviolet light. So urethanes do a really good job of having some ultraviolet resistance, whereas epoxies are really good for building that system up and getting some good adhesion to your substrate.
So if you put a clear epoxy over a clear urethane over a colored epoxy, you get some protection, but really, if you want to have the color stay, you need to color the urethane. Is that right?
Typically, I generally recommend folks add that color pack into their clear coat of urethane just to make sure you've got some consistent color and gloss before you even get down to that level of the epoxy. So, okay. Yeah.
So your epoxy would give you, so you got your better adhesion to the concrete. Is that because it stays wet longer, soaks in deeper?
I really just think the chemical properties of epoxies show a little bit more robustness in terms of the way that they stick in. They do wet out a little bit better than urethanes do, but you're talking 6 to 8 mils of an epoxy, which really does soak in very well, and it sticks to itself really, really well. Urethanes really are there for that color and gloss retention. They're UV resistant more so than an epoxy would be. So and they do, urethanes cure down to a harder, more abrasion resistant film than an epoxy would be. It's got some much higher hardness properties than you'd see from an epoxy. So for example, I'm got some performance data here for our series 248 is typically our workhorse urethane, whereas our series 222 is our workhorse epoxy. Typically per ASTM D4060, which is a test for abrasion and loss due to a grinder wheel. With series 248, the urethane, you're seeing 18 milligrams of loss, whereas series 222, you're seeing 65.5 milligrams of loss. So really those urethanes cure really hard and prevent abrasion for a longer period of time. So if you're running, fork truck traffic or, pallets with nails on it and that kind of thing over a shop floor, I typically recommend, again, that having that urethane finish to give you some abrasion resistance. So
when do you decide to add aggregate to an epoxy? Something like a quartz or a sand or a flake, that kind of thing.
When you need some significant slip resistance. So if you've got that floor, it's just routinely, regularly wet, and you don't want people slipping and falling. An aggregate broadcast like a quartz or a flake typically helps build thickness in a system and give you some slip resistance. So, generally speaking, an aggregate broadcast floor versus a thin film epoxy floor is going to give you more impact resistance and give you more skid resistance.
Is that just because it's thicker, or is it because the sand acts as a little bit of a shock absorber because you're building up space for things to move?
I think the sand does act as a bit of a shock absorber, but I think a lot of that comes down to the material thickness that comes from the aggregate broadcast. Let me see. Got a sample binder here. Now, typically, your quartz broadcast system, if you can see this, probably can't see it very well, but no, you can't. You're talking an 1/8 inch installed for a typical quartz broadcast system, 16th to an 1/8 of an inch versus 20 thousandths of an inch for a thin film system, or 20 mils. So you've got a lot more material build there, which gives you that higher impact resistance.
So if you're doing warehouse, you're just looking for abrasion and stuff like that. So that's your, a thin film floor, epoxy, urethane top, or I guess if you're looking to be really budget conscious, maybe you're just cleaning it, put a coat of urethane, coat of acrylic down, something like that.
Yeah, some acrylic sealer or something like that. That'll give it some color and really just spruce up the room more than anything. So,
yeah. So then we move into something. Okay, I've got a fire station now. I'm going to park fire trucks on it, or I have a shop garage. We're working we're working on heavy. We're changing brakes and engines, and we got lots of hydraulic spills and stuff like that. What does that do different to you? When do you bounce from there to something like a urethane concrete?
So, I mean, a urethane concrete or epoxy mortar floor is a great way to build up some material thickness. Obviously, the thicker that material is on top of a slab, it's going to give you more impact resistance. But surprisingly enough, I see a lot of folks get their budget blown by a mortar floor or urethane cement. You're talking twice the material cost a lot of times, and a little bit more prep work involved. Urethane cements are not easy to install as compared to an epoxy. You're talking a short pot life and probably needing a 4 to 5 guy crew versus a 3-man crew for some smaller epoxy flooring applications. So it really depends on what your client's expectations are in terms of how long they want the floor to last. I mean, everything has a life cycle cost associated with it, but I see a lot of hangers go just thin film epoxy systems. 2 coats of epoxy and a urethane finish coat. They're driving planes on top of those suckers. So I've done a couple of fire station projects where we did a quartz broadcast and that kind of thing, but that was really more decorative towards the room. They wanted it to look really nice when you park the fire trucks in it. So
yeah, I mean, firefighters like their things to be shiny for sure,
and they like it to last. A thin film system out of the 4 different kind of material systems we've talked about is your lowest life cycle expectation. If all you want to do is get your floor coated to where it's cleanable and you want to spend as little money as possible, that's typically when we go that route. And unfortunately, that's the way a lot of folks end up going nowadays. It's just cheap as they can get sometimes.
What about flake? How does flake compare? Does flake do anything other than just change the look of it? Does it add any strength?
So again, about the same way with the quartz systems, it does build up some material thickness through a flake broadcast. If you're looking for a 16th inch installed system, you could get away with a primer coat, broadcast flake into 20 mils of epoxy, grout coat and urethane finish coat, and you've got a really good looking floor that's got a 16th of an inch to it versus 20 mils even. So it gives you a good aesthetic finish. And I think a lot of it comes with that film build that comes with the aggregate broadcast into it.
Okay. So when we're talking about different kinds of sealers, I mean, there's epoxies, there's urethanes, polyaspartics. I mean, where do you start picking on? I mean, we hear lots of things.
Yeah, a lot of times that I get involved with polyaspartic applications is mostly when your client has limited downtime to get an application done. So, your typical epoxy floor coating, your finish coat, you're looking at 12 to 24 hours a lot of times to place that into service, 12 to 24 hours to top coat a lot of times. Whereas polyaspartics, you can get 2 to 3 coats done in one day. I mean, if you're doing something small like your garage floor or something like that, where you've only got a couple hundred square feet to get coated, you can get an application done in a day, with some good surface prep. Get your surface cleaned, prepped, throw 2 coats of your polyaspartic down, and you're walking away from the floor and done. So I think there's a big benefit that comes with polyaspartics, mostly from the working time associated with using them. That's really the only time that I have seen a lot of folks go that route, or if they're trying to cut a step out sometimes. If you have an aggregate broadcast floor, a lot of times, say you have a quartz floor, you do a primer, double broadcast into the quartz, you do a grout coat of epoxy a lot of times, and then you do that urethane finish coat to give it some skid resistance. You could cut out a coat by going polyaspartic. So you primed with epoxy, double broadcast, and then if you top coat it with the polyaspartics have the hardness and the UV resistance of a urethane, but can get the film build of an epoxy. So you're talking, you could get 8 to 10 mils even of a continuous finish coat that's got the grout that you need to close up the the aggregate broadcast and also has the skid resistance to it too. So.
Yeah, so I mean, they're a more expensive product, a little bit harder to work with typically.
For sure.
Mostly just because they're and they're moisture cured, right? As opposed to like I mean, I guess a solvent cure or any other kind of cure.
Yeah, so your epoxies it's a chemical reaction that happens between your A and B. Whereas your polyaspartics, you do have an A and a B reacting, but it's also dependent on that relative humidity in your air. So they're reacting to the moisture. The more humid it is, the faster it's going to cure. And most polyaspartics have a much shorter working time or pot life than your typical epoxies or urethanes would have. You're talking, epoxies, you're typically 40 minutes to an hour versus 15 to 20 minutes with most polyaspartics. So, polyaspartics have a lot of advantages towards, shortening a project, but you better have a qualified applicator putting them down that knows what they're getting into before they start doing it. So
yeah, you don't want to put 20 or 30,000 square feet of that down your first day.
Well, funny enough, I'm dealing with a project right now where a contractor installed polyaspartic system over an epoxy, and it was a thin film pigmented floor. They decided to go polyaspartic mostly due to supply chain constraints and getting urethanes. Really when you're doing a thin film floor, you need to buff that second coat of epoxy, get a uniform surface profile on it, and degloss it before you're going over the top with the polyaspartic. And they're having issues with the adhesion between that polyaspartic and that epoxy coat there. So there's some disadvantages when you're, used to doing things one certain way and then switching towards a different product line or a different chemistry that, if they get missed, sometimes unfortunately that costs money to fix that problem. So.
Yeah, and definitely the supply chain is affecting the price. I mean, it seems like prices are good for about 30 minutes right now. I mean, it just takes all the time. It's crazy.
It's been crazy. One of the conversations I had was with our market manager at Tnemec that, I've heard our raw material cost to formulate a 100% solids epoxy has gone up about 45% in the last year. And I mean, I think we've transferred about 20% of that onto our customers, which, I mean, how in the world are you going to call somebody and go, hey, by the way, your price is 45% higher than it was? I mean, that's just a crazy conversation that in an industry where we're used to having 2 to 3% price increases year over year. So,
yeah. And the contracts may have been let out a year ago, they're trying to hold it. But yeah, I mean, the time you build makes a big difference in how much it's going to cost.
Yeah. And I think it's good to, I think everybody's become a little more aware of the situation that we're dealing with all of the supply chain constraints that everybody has been dealing with. And, I've heard the price of stainless steel has almost doubled or tripled even. And it's 20% is a lot less than doubling or tripling sometimes.
Yeah, your refrigerator is worth a lot more if you can just take the steel off of it and go sell it.
You're not kidding.
So what about RH versus, we used to do moisture tests where we were putting down the calcium chloride, stuff like that. Yeah. We still do them. And then some people are really concerned about RH. And where does Tnemec fall on that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I mean, we have moisture mitigation products. That's where really those urethane cement products come into play. Most urethane cements are very moisture tolerant, can hold up to 99% relative humidity on that relative humidity probe test, or 20 pounds on the calcium chloride test. But again, the budget has to make sense for your client to go that route. I've noticed a lot of folks end up going the polishing route when they have moisture mitigation concerns. It's if all they want is a decorative finish at the end of the day, it's really not worth paying that double the material cost to build up a system to give them a flake finished floor or something like that. So
your primer costs more than your floor.
Right. So at what point does the rubber meet the road in terms of moisture mitigation? And that's something we run into a lot, is when folks want it or kind of teetering on whether or not to go polish or epoxy floor coating. That moisture test is a good indicator of probably going that polishing route. So,
are those tests good for anything other than telling you what it is that day? I mean, do they tell you? They don't tell you what it's going to be. Like, you can have a gutter go down, a downspout that's clogged. You can get moisture issues that quickly.
Yeah, paint is not like moisture, or hydrostatic pressure, especially. If you've got a below grade structure, a lot of times that water is trying to push its way through. So if you don't have a moisture barrier, a lot of times that's a big concern for a coatings application. And granted, there's there's ways to address that. But again, most of that is based on the day that you're testing it. So, it's really, it's an important conversation to manage that expectation with your client in terms of, hey, this is what we've got. I'm not saying we're definitely never going to have a moisture issue, but based on what I'm seeing, I think we should go this route. It's the conversation I typically have. So.
Yeah, it's tough, and you say, well, it just depends on what it is when we get here, and that's a big budget number, though. And I don't blame a customer for being concerned. It's a big deal. It has a major impact on the budget to figure out what's going to be, the true cost of their floor.
Yep.
Yeah, no, it's so what about? I guess we haven't talked about polyureas. I know there's a lot of polyureas. Is that really a different chemical structure? Is that something you guys deal with much?
So, I'm familiar with polyureas, but, I don't represent them with the product line that we sell. But I know they're, a lot of those are used for, your more truck bed liners or, immersion grade. I've seen them in the water and wastewater industry a fair amount where folks have really limited. It's kind of like the polyaspartic floor coatings where you've got really limited downtime to have a structure out of service. Polyureas are great for that because they cure really quickly and they make a pretty hard, flexible type of film that can go over, some more aged concrete structures. The concern associated with them is really the application. It's typically a plural component application. With something that cures as quickly as it does, you better have a qualified guy spraying that gun, because I've run into probably more polyurea failures than successful jobs just because of the applicator that's out there putting it on. So,
yeah, you definitely you got a primer with that, and then you got to know how you're putting it down and get it to lay out correctly, and you kind of only get one shot at it too. I mean, much like any coating, you can sand it off, but
a lot of times, unfortunately, with the epoxy floor coating or any kind of coatings application, if it's done wrong the first time, the fix is oftentimes more expensive than the original application. Because it's the labor associated with removing everything that's down and then hitting the reset button, essentially. So
it's like pouring concrete; it goes in a lot easier than it comes out.
Yeah, you're not kidding.
It doesn't go in easy and it doesn't go in cheap, but it's definitely cheaper and easier than it is coming out.
Yeah,
without a doubt. So, what do you tell people like when you meet a new customer or something like that? What are kind of the like your top 3 warnings that you give them? Say, hey man, you're getting into coatings, you're doing coatings. It's a big market, it's a big business. It's certainly you've already got it. I mean, we didn't talk about prep, sandblasting shot blasting versus grinding versus scarifying and many others. What are the kinds of things that you kind of give the heads up to a new contractor on?
Really just having an open line of communication with your coatings manufacturing rep. My phone is always on. I'm happy to answer questions whenever people ask them, but I notice a lot of folks just assume they know what they're doing and go ahead and do it without asking any questions, and that's we're here as a resource. It's my job to help you answer these questions. It's my job to go out and look at job sites and make sure we're all on the same page and working together as a unified front, and that's really the biggest thing I tell new customers of mine is, hey, believe it or not, I will answer the phone when you call me. I want to be on job sites. I want to help you get the job done right because my name's on this just as much as yours is. I mean, my paint is going on to your structure, so really just encouraging folks that I want to partner with them and work more closely with my customers to make sure they're getting good end results. It's really important for me to be involved in a lot of these. So,
a good deal. Yeah. And that's something that people don't think about. It's like, man, people think about vendors as people that sell them things, but there's a lot of support that comes with many vendors that says, hey, they can keep you out of trouble. They can help you honor warranties. They can make sure you don't run into warranty issues, or worse, non-warranty issues. I think that's a good point. It's like, make use of it. You're paying for it, so you should use it.
Well, yeah, our company calls it the value of the difference. As we have a reputation in the industry sometimes for being a little more expensive than everybody else, or being 5% higher certain areas or 2% lower other areas. And it's like, well, yeah, there's a value that comes to that bucket of paint that I'm selling you though. As I want to be involved, I want to go look at your job sites. I'm there as a partner with you to make this happen. I'm not just some guy at a store selling you paint. So
makes sense. Well, man, I really appreciate it. This is great. I think probably want to try and set up a couple more of these to figure out, and as we go through a floor system, maybe from cradle to grave of, okay, now you've decided you're going to do a shop floor. What does it look like? What is that process? And what are the, kind of your decision points and where it happens. So hopefully we can get you back on and kind of help us walk through that and maybe avoid some pitfalls for somebody.
That'd be great.
Me, but somebody else too.
That would help too. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Chad, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. And we'll catch you back on here again real soon, I think.
Sounds good. Talk soon. Thanks, Chad.
Thanks for listening to This is Concrete. We look forward to you joining us next time. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.